Cinematic adaptations of fairy tales date back almost to the beginning of the medium itself. But it wasn't until Jean Cocteau came along for the genre to reach its true potential. Influenced by Surrealism, Cocteau proved that fantasy wasn't just for children, but that it could be truly sophisticated and beautiful art. Hello, I'm Peter Garrett, and this is the Criterion Chronicle. Welcome to the Criterion Chronicle. I'm your host, Peter Garrett. The Criterion Chronicle is the chronological journey through the Criterion Collection, starting from DVD Spine number 1. Now, moving along on our cinematic voyage, we arrive at Criterion Spine number 6, Jean Cocteau's fantasy classic, Beauty and the Beast. And even though many of you probably know the story, for the few who might not, the story focuses on a young woman named Belle who goes to live with the beast, or with a beast, at his castle in an effort to save her father's life. And Cocteau's film is often cited as the most faithful adaptation of the original story. But I actually learned something that was really interesting. I learned that the original story has a complex history. So there's actually two versions of the original story. The very first text of Beauty and the Beast, called La Belle et la Bête, was written by Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve in 1740. And this version was actually a novella, like novel-length story. So it was a much longer story, because fairy tales are often, they're small and they're very truncated, and they're not novel length, they're novella length. But her version was the actual original first version of that story. And then she died in 1755, and then a year after Villeneuve's death, an abridged version was written by Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont that was published in 1756. So, and while it kept the core story from Villeneuve's original work, de Beaumont added the moral lessons that were intended for children that were standard for fairy tales. So I thought that was really interesting, because I just assumed that the original story was had just started as a fairy tale, and I didn't know that it actually was created as a bigger story, as a more substantive story, with more details and more plot, which I actually think plays into why the story itself tends to be richer in a lot of ways than other fairy tales tend to be. And I'll get into more of that, down the line in this video. But I just, again, when I learned about that, I just thought, wow, I thought that was really cool. So, but the thing is that virtually every film adaptation to date has used the de Beaumont version as the starting point. So, which, I figure makes sense, because again, fairy tales, it's, they're going to go based on that. Now, I don't know if people even knew about the original version, the novel, the Villeneuve version from 1740. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But I guess it makes sense, because with the de Beaumont version, because it's shorter, there's less you have to adapt story-wise, because obviously one of the drawbacks to adapting novels is typically what story elements to keep and which to cut. So whereas a short story, usually you have more than enough space in the film to cover everything in the story. So, but Beauty and the Beast is probably one of the most popular French fairy tales of all time. Yeah, I would say it ranks in the top 3. I actually thought I thought that it would be the number 1, but I learned that that actually Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty were also original French fairy tales. So those would probably be, Cinderella would be 1, Sleeping Beauty would be 2, and then I'd say Beauty and the Beast would be number 3. after that. But I would say that while Beauty and the Beast might not be the most popular overall, it is definitely the most thematically complex and rich of them. Because, again, Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty were written to be fairy tales. So the nature of those stories were a lot simpler. But Beauty and the Beast has been adapted into film dozens of times in the span of over 125 years, where because the first short version that in my research that I did found that the first version of that was ever made was in 1899. So there have been obviously many. Again, same thing. I thought that it would be higher in that list, but other fairy tales like Cinderella and Sleepy, have more adaptations and interpretations over the years. So, but out of all of the versions that have been made, the two most famous versions of the film would be, as everybody knows, the 1991 Disney animated musical, which is probably the most famous version. And then after that, I would say Jean Cocteau's 1946 masterpiece would be the second most well-known. Now, I'm not saying the 1991 the 91 version, the Disney one, is better. I'm just saying it's the most well-known. So, and while both of the films are groundbreaking, with the 1991 film becoming the first animated film to ever be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, Cocteau's 1946 film is still considered the most pioneering and influential adaptation of the story. So, and Cocteau's, and the thing is, Cocteau's film actually served as the main inspiration for the later Disney version in a lot of ways. So, and Cocteau didn't make very many films in his career. And in fact, Beauty and the Beast was only his second feature that he made. So, but Beauty and the Beast is often considered Cocteau's most popular and his best film overall. So, and then, in my previous episode on the 400 Blows, I talked about how Truffaut was a member of the French New Wave. But when you look at Cocteau, even though he predated that movement, he was very much in his own filmmaking world. So, Cocteau treated the source material with a maturity and a respect that allowed him to create a film that was, equally enjoyed by children and adults. So, because Cocteau, the reason why he was in a league of his own is because Cocteau didn't like being a part of film movements. He wanted to be independent. He wanted to be his own artist. So, but before Cocteau's film, fairy tales were mainly made as short films, or they were animated, because Disney, started making animated shorts and then features, with both being specifically targeted towards children. And even though it had been less than a decade since Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs had come out in 1937, Disney was already established as the dominant studio for fairy tale stories. So, and so I think that the fact that Cocteau decided to take on adapting this fairy tale and do it in a way that was completely different from what anybody else was doing at that time was, a testament to his confidence and to his creative vision. Because, the key component that made Beauty and the Beast stand out so much was the specific artistic style Cocteau employed to tell it. Prior to Jean Cocteau's film, fairy tale adaptations were very traditional in how they were told. So they were simple, straightforward storytelling with clear heroes, villains, moral objectivity, the villain comeuppances, and the happily ever after. But by telling the story through the lens of surrealism, Cocteau added new layers and complexity to the genre. So, surrealism started as an artistic movement after World War I, and it became officially recognized in the mid 1920s ish. So, and the movement encompassed all forms of art. So it included poetry, literature, paintings, music, and of course, film. So, along with Cocteau, other surrealist filmmakers would include Louis Buñuel, Alejandro Jodorowsky, David Lynch, and Charlie Kaufman. So, and those are the ones that typically delved into it regularly. So, other filmmakers, have dabbled in surrealism and surrealist elements in film, but those were the filmmakers that really, like, most of their films would have recurring elements of surrealism to them. So, and the key elements to surrealism was to present basically irrational or absurd imagery that was juxtaposed with real life. So real people, real objects, real events. And by doing this, it would often give the films a dreamlike quality to them. So, and in Beauty and the Beast, there are many examples of surrealism. Most notably in the fact that inanimate objects are alive in a way in the film that are impossible in real life. So, for instance, the doors in Beast's castle, they open and they close on their own, as well as the door to Belle's room actually speaking to her. So, and the whole door opening on its own, that obviously has become like a very recognizable trope in a lot of films. But at the time, this idea that a door can open and close on its own and then to me, the speaking part is actually the most surreal part, because an inanimate object can't speak. So that, I think, was and again, and so in 1946 that was very, very much more revolutionary at the time. So, and then all throughout the Beast's castle, there are living statues that move and that breathe, and that are just amazing looking, amazing, I want to say makeup and design for them. So, and then I'd say probably the most important object in the film would be the mirror in Belle's room. So, and that's because mirrors are actually very, very important recurring objects in surrealist art. And they have a strong presence in Beauty and the Beast. So, because not only can the mirror speak to Belle as well, just like the door, but it has the power to show multiple images in its reflection. The mirror shows Belle's sickly father at one point, which prompts her to beg the Beast to let her go home to visit him. And then later, when she's back at her house, it shows Belle's sisters both looking into it, and it shows them, I think it's either how they truly are or what they fear themselves to be. Because one of them sees herself as old and ugly, and then the other sees herself as an animal. So it looks like a monkey. And I saw that and I just thought to myself, what is that trying to say about her sister? So, but so the mirror itself is definitely the most, and then there's moments where the Beast looks in the mirror, and so it definitely plays a very important part throughout the entirety of the film. So, and I would say that Beauty and the Beast is probably the most accessible and narratively coherent surrealist film, because it's based on a pre-existing story and a fairy tale. So, because other more pure surrealist films like Louis Buñuel's Un Chien Andalou, or even Cocteau's first film that was called The Blood of a Poet, they're ranked higher as being more surrealist than Beauty and the Beast, but they're also there's not as much narrative cohesion to them as there is in Beauty and the Beast. So while one of the stylistic parts of Beauty and the Beast is surrealism, the other would be Gothic. So now, however, it's not a purely Gothic film. It's not a Gothic romance compared to films like William Wyler's Wuthering Heights, Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, Robert Stevenson's Jane Eyre, or George Cukor's Gaslight, but it incorporates many key Gothic tropes. So the most obvious would probably be the Beast's castle itself. It's this, because it's a grand, kind of dark structure. And the exteriors of the castle were actually shot at a real 17th century chateau in France, as well as the surrounding, garden and some of the other grounds around the Beast's castle. Notably, there's an area where it has a bunch of stone figures of animals. So, and actually what was interesting is that this was actually a part of a broader stylistic choice that Cocteau made by using 17th century aesthetics for the story that takes place in the 18th century, which I thought was fascinating. So because but on the outside and the inside, the castle has a very dark and ominous presence. So, and some of the shots that highlight the castle's Gothic nature would include when Belle's father first finds the castle in the fog, where he is lost in the forest. And then basically we see branches part to reveal the castle. So it's this grand revealing of this kind of magnificent structure. So that, and then obviously as when he approaches the castle and the door and everything, it really builds the anticipation for when he actually goes inside. And the first introduction to the castle, and because of that type of introduction, it gives it this kind of dreamlike quality to it. So, and then after that, when Belle faints the first time that she sees the Beast, and the Beast is carrying her up to her room, it's got this very kind of big framing to it, and he's carrying her upstairs, and it has this very dramatic lighting and everything. So again, very, very Gothic aesthetic. And then, the outside of the castle, as I said, again, with the animal figures. And then the character of the Beast himself is actually is considered a standard Gothic protagonist in the vein of Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights or Edward Rochester in Jane Eyre. So, because the Beast knows he's a monster, but he harbors this kind of deep unhappiness and this kind of tortured soul, and he yearns for love. So, and that's something that I think is very for the Gothic protagonist, for the male Gothic protagonist, tends to be one of the staple characteristics, is the fact that on the outside he might be very rough, whether that's personally, emotionally, or in this case physically, but then there's a hidden layer underneath them that is either broken or hurt or, again, tortured. So, and which the Beast follows to a T. And then another core aspect of that kind of character is we find out later that Beast is hiding a secret from Belle. So, but granted, unlike most Gothic stories, though, the secret isn't this kind of morbid, scary one, because typically in true Gothic romances, the secret is typically, it has to do with like a mysterious death or something nefarious that is in the character's past or in his history. Whereas in this, it's not really like that. So the Beast has a secret, but it's not a bad secret. So, and then the third major Gothic element of the film is that it's about forbidden or taboo love. So, which, because there are clear sexual undertones to the film as we see the romance between Belle and the Beast develop. And again, I mean, I'm sure that you can understand the idea of a human and essentially an animal in the context of a romance is obviously hugely forbidden and taboo. But and that's obviously the nature of, I mean, and to me that's kind of the nth degree of that type of story is the fact that it's not just a human with a dark side. It is a literal human being that is an animal that lives like that. So, but yeah, when I look at and when you look at the film and how the surrealist elements and the Gothic elements come together, they really create this wonderful, unique film stylistically. So, and that's something that I think is one of the things that's really interesting and enjoyable about the film, because it's not quite a pure surrealist film, it's not quite a pure Gothic film, but it's got enough of both to satisfy, I think, both stylistic elements to it. So, and then even though the film's overall style evokes fantastic and surreal imagery, the heart of the story is in its portrayal of its main theme. So first and foremost, Beauty and the Beast is a story about love. But it's actually it's much more faceted than it may seem on the surface. Because in typical fairy tales, love is usually the love story is the main story, and that's really the only story. It's about a princess or a prince falling in love, somehow coming together, and that's that. So, in Cinderella with the prince, or Sleeping Beauty, or Snow White, it's all the same, and there's very little variation in terms of relationships and dynamics in there. But this film features different types of love relationships that creates multiple thematic strands to observe. You can watch the film and think, like, is this a movie about just purely romantic love? Is this about familial love? So I think so there's multiple different ways that you can look at it. So that's why for me, the film is about not just romantic love, but it's about love just in general, as a broad emotion. So, and to me, there are three prominent relationships that explore love in the film, and that is predominantly that's Belle and the Beast, that is Belle and Avenant, and then that is Belle and her father. So Belle and Avenant is the first relationship we see in the film, and it's presented as an unrequited love, because Avenant is the best friend of Belle's brother Ludovic, and he loves Belle and wants to marry her, but Belle continuously refuses his proposals. So, and he's your kind of standard male character in this type of story. He's handsome, he's we think he's strong, and we think that he might be heroic, because we haven't seen any of that stuff yet, but that's he's presented as being that in the beginning. And so and the main reason, and at first we're like, why would she turn this guy down? But the main reason she claims that she won't marry him is due to the loyalty that she has to her father and not wanting to abandon him. So, and even though Avenant is continually rejected, he still cares for Belle, and he feels the need to protect her. So, which I think was an interesting, which I liked that dynamic for the character, or I like that choice for the character, because it doesn't make him strictly like an unlikable guy. Some people read him as being more of a, more arrogant or unlikable, but so but like Avenant, he wants to still, you know, be with Belle and save her from the beast, because when Belle returns to visit her father, Avenant becomes the one who's determined to go back to the beast's castle to kill him. Um so uh but again, like and again, that's the only that's the only time we see we really see Avenant in any kind of, I'll say, negative way. Because at that point, you know, we've come to like the beast, and we see how tortured he is, and we see how unhappy he is, and then for Avenant to be like, well, I'm going to kill him. But other than that, again, like, you know, he doesn't mistreat Belle. He doesn't feel entitled to her love. He doesn't act with an arrogance, or with an overt arrogance, like, oh, you're just gonna come to me eventually. Which actually, and the funny thing is because the character of Avenant was served as the major inspiration for the character of Gaston in the Disney version, but Gaston is purely a villain in every way. So where Gaston is obviously saying that, oh, well, you'll never get a better guy like me, Avenant doesn't feel that way. He wants to be with Belle, and that's kind of it. So that establishes the fact that Belle's personal, her sense of self and duty to her father is more important than her own potential happiness, as it were. I mean, we don't know if she would actually be happy with Avenant if they got married, but what we do know is that she's willing to sacrifice any kind of autonomy in life for herself so that she can still take care of her father and make sure that her father's not alone, because the mother isn't there. Now, I don't know why there is no mother in the story. I think that's typically another fairy tale trope. Is usually it's just a single father that's in the picture. Although I don't know, because you had Cinderella because in Cinderella it's a stepmother. It's not an actual mother. So but I would say that the relationship of Belle and her father is probably the most important one in the film, because it represents familial love. And it's Belle's throughout the entirety of the film, even more so than I'd say than the love that she eventually has for the beast, is because, you know, she's one of 4 children, but of those 4, she's the only one that seems to genuinely care and want to take care of her father. So, you know, she's got 2 sisters, Felicity and Adelaide, and they're spoiled and they're selfish and they're dismissive and insulting to their father because they just want to be wealthy. They want all the perks they want to marry rich men, and they look at their father as like this kind of loser because he doesn't have money anymore. Whereas Belle truly sees him, you know, she sees him as her father and loves him regardless of whether he's got money or whether he doesn't have money. And the fact that it's a pure love. So and then you have her brother Ludovic, who he's not a bad guy, but he just kind of seems like he's just interested in his own pursuits and his own life. So, and he doesn't really do much. He just kind of lays around, and at one point he starts making deals with a moneylender that actually gets the family in more financial trouble. So I think that while Ludovic doesn't maybe say overtly despise his father the way that Felicity and Adelaide do, I think that he's got maybe an apathy to him, or just like maybe just like, yeah, you know, you're there, but I'm here, and I put myself first. So he's more self-involved in that way. And where like his actions don't, he might not think through his actions and see how his actions affect other people. So it's this kind of blind spot he has. It's not like an active, like, I hate my father, so I'm going to do something like this. But Belle truly loves her father because, when he leaves to go to on his business trip, so that thinking that he's going to get this deal done and he's going to be getting a lot of money and that it's going to solve all their financial problems, which of course is what her sisters care about, and for the most part, what Belle's brother cares about. What she says is, she just says, "Could you bring me back a rose, please?" And that's it. Just bring her back a rose. Which that also shows that for her, it's not about money. It's not about the materialist things that everybody else seems to care about. She loves her father, and she just asks for him to bring back a rose. But that ends up being the catalyst for the main story, or for the main conflict and drive of the story. Because, subsequently when her father does find the Beast's castle and stays there, he ends up going inside. He doesn't encounter the Beast at all. He goes in, he sits down at a table where there's a bunch of food, and then he basically falls asleep for the night. And then when he wakes up, he goes to leave. It's daytime by the time he takes off. And then he's walking around the Beast's property, as it were, or land, I should say. And then he sees a rose, and then he ends up and he picks one of the roses for Belle. And then that's what leads the Beast to appear and confront him and say that because of that, because he says that, the roses are the things that he loves the most, that because Belle's father made this dire offense after the Beast's hospitality, now he has to die for that transgression. Which obviously the father is like, oh my God, I'm sorry, I didn't, please, I didn't know. So the Beast ends up giving him one alternative, which is he won't kill him unless one of his daughters takes his place. So then, the father goes back to his home, tells the story to his family. Without hesitation, Belle comes along and says she'll go because she believes that she is responsible and she wants to save her father. So, and to me, one of the core elements of love, in my opinion, is that of sacrifice, is your ability to put a person that you love in front of you. That person is more important than you are. And that's what Belle does. She puts her father before herself. She's willing to die for him. So that's why I think that love itself is probably the most important relationship to me in the film overall, because of that. It shows the lengths and it also shows the type of person that Belle is. It's because of those actions that makes us connect to Belle, because she's pure goodness as a human being. So, and then it's also the love for her father that drives her to want to leave the Beast to visit her home, because she knows he's ill and she wants to try to do anything to help her, or to help him. So, and that's the thing, is she cannot stand the fact that he's at home essentially by himself, because even though her siblings are there and other people are there, she knows they're not helping him, and that his illness is due to the fact that he's worried about her. So, and it's Belle's loyalty and devotion to her father that serves in such stark contrast to the rest of her family. So, and I think that obviously that's a deliberate choice, because we're meant to look at the rest of the family in a very negative way. We're meant to see the family as ungrateful and spoiled, and it's all meant to make Belle look like that much better of a person. So, and then finally, the main romance between Belle and the Beast is obviously the meat and potatoes of the story, which shows the essence of true love. So, and this is the obviously the main love, and this is probably the main relationship that is obviously it's the crux of the entire story. And that's fine, but as I said, for me, the story with the father is, or the relationship to the father is to me is a little more interesting. So, but obviously you might not agree. So you might just love the main love story, and that's the one you prefer, which is cool. That's fine. Everybody, different strokes. So, and just obviously, like the story, the way the story plays out, Belle is initially frightened and repulsed by the Beast. But of course she comes to realize that his soul is much nobler and decent than his outward appearance tends to be. Because in the very beginning, when she comes to the castle, and at first when she goes down to have her first, I guess, dinner at, I think it's like 7:00, the Beast basically comes down and says, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to ask you the same question every day. And that is, will you be my wife? And of course, in the very beginning, Belle's like, of course not. You're a beast. That's ludicrous. So, and it's the Beast's love for Belle, though, that causes him so much pain and anguish and how he looks. Because when the Beast first meets Belle, he's immediately reverential towards her, and he begs her not to look at him because he knows how awful and ghastly he looks. And we might see it as cliched now, but at the time that the original story was written in the 18th century, the idea was a lot more unique and groundbreaking. Because what made the story so different for its time was the fact that the main male character of a fairy tale was usually, was a prince or a knight that was obviously supposed to be handsome and brave and kind and good in every way. But obviously Beauty and the Beast totally went against that. Beauty and the Beast subverted that by having the character be outwardly ugly and we think somewhat vicious and aggressive, potentially, like an animal, but he's tortured and he's complex, and the thing is you could argue that every romance story that focuses on finding true love beneath this exterior of a person owes a debt to Beauty and the Beast. So everything from The Phantom of the Opera to Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands and Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water to David Lynch's The Elephant Man or David Cronenberg's The Fly, and then even King Kong to an extent. So, the story of Beauty and the Beast has been very influential for centuries now. And again, the reason why that story resonates so much is because, again, it definitely has that core idea of, don't judge a book by its cover. And Beauty and the Beast is basically the poster film, the poster story, fairy tale for that. So, and what makes the love story so engaging and enjoyable to watch is due to the wonderful performances by the film's two main leads. So the film's leads were played by Jean Marais and Josette Day, who both give terrific performances in the film. Now, Jean Marais actually has a more unique contribution to the film because he plays two characters in it, which is he plays the Beast and he plays Avenel. So, and the fact that he plays both serves as, I think, a fascinating exercise in duality, in the fact that because the Beast and Avenant are rivals to each other, they're vying for Belle's love, but they also represent kind of two sides of the same coin, where they're because they're polar opposites in character. So outwardly, Avenant is, he's handsome, he's seemingly chivalrous and brave, but he ultimately proves to be villainous. And when he decides to kill the Beast and steal his treasure. So whereas on the other hand, the Beast is willing to let Belle go at the risk of his life, proving his worth to her. Because when Belle wants to go back and visit her father, the Beast says, "Well, if you go and you don't return, I will die." So, so it actually creates this interesting situation and dilemma for Belle, because if she doesn't go back to visit her father, he might die, probably would have died. But then the Beast says, "If you don't return, I will die." She wants to go home. He knows how much she loves her father. So, and he understands that. But he also, I think the reason he does this is because he knows that he'll probably never meet another woman like Belle ever again. He'll never have that opportunity to be around a woman like that ever again. And so in his mind, it's now or never. Either we are together, or I will die. So, and the Beast character was actually modified by Cocteau in ways to make him seem more animalistic compared to how his portrayal in the original story. So, for instance, when the Beast returns home returns to his castle from hunting for food, he comes in, his hands are covered in blood, and he's looking at them, and he just, again, you can see his reaction to the fact that he is this animal. And because we don't know how long he's been a beast. Has he been a beast for years? Has it been, for most of his life? But it's, we see that just, again, he's horrified at himself pretty much at every turn. Another instance is when the Beast is drinking water from a pond. He's basically doing it like almost like a cat would. So he's on his belly, he's got his face in the water, and he's lapping it up with his tongue. So so it's very so Cocteau made these decisions to make him, again, and again, I've never read it's funny because the original story the original fairy tale version of the story is in the booklet that's with the DVD. So, which I probably should have read it. Unfortunately, I didn't get around to reading the story before I came in to do the episode. But yeah. So, but from probably, because again, a detail like that wouldn't most likely, maybe it was in the original story. So the original Villeneuve novella might have had elements like that. But the fact that Cocteau wanted him to be more animalistic on the surface, I think it's because on the other side, Cocteau wanted to be so far above the other men, the human men in the film, and showing, to show that he had such, much more strength of character, because again, between Avenant and Ludovic and Belle's father, the male characters are not, they're not that strong of characters. And so the thing is that I think that, Cocteau wanted the Beast version to be so strong and to be so just like it, memorable, that when he transforms into the human form, into his Prince version, at the Prince Charming version at the end, that Belle, and to an extent probably the audience, would be somewhat disappointed now, because it's like, oh man, we kind of like him better as the Beast. So I think so the idea that Cocteau wanted to create a character that on the one hand was this this experiment in extreme opposites. So on the one hand, he's a vicious animal, but on the other hand, he has a lot of integrity and strength and selflessness to him. So, and the dual role actually comes to a head at the end when both of the characters go through a transformation, and they take the other's place, essentially. So at the very end, you have Ludovic and Evenal that end up going to the castle, and they get to the castle, and then they find the treasure room, or they go to the treasure room, the Beast's treasure room, and they break into it. So Avenal just he breaks the glass and he starts to climb down, and as he's climbing down into the treasure room, he's shot in the back by an arrow, and then he basically he turns into the Beast, and then he falls down into the floor of the treasure room, and he dies. And then conversely, right when that happens, the Beast, who was dying up till that point, when Belle came back and Belle is on top of him, and he's pleading, and she's pleading for him to stay alive and that he's strong and that he can't die, all of a sudden he transforms into a handsome prince. So and the thing is that the thing is, Belle doesn't kiss him to turn him into a prince. What the prince says is the reason why, because we find out that again, he had a curse on him, and he's had a curse on him that turned him into a beast for many years. I think he says it's because like his parents didn't believe in magic or something along those lines, and then because of that, they were cursed, and that their son, the prince, was turned into an animal. So, but then the prince tells Belle that the reason why she was able to transform him back is because she just looked at him with a look of genuine love. So, and as far as why that was done as opposed to a kiss, I'd like to think it's because in the 1940s, maybe having a woman kiss an animal, obviously it's a man in a prosthetic suit, but in a mask and stuff like that. But still, maybe the implication of a woman kissing an animal was probably just maybe too much for audiences at that time. So I wasn't able to find out why that was. Or maybe that was in the original story. Again, I didn't because I didn't go back and reread the original story again. Maybe that's what it was. But because typically in these films, it's a kiss, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, it's a kiss that actually breaks the spell or saves the life of the person. So, but in this, it's just a loving look. And what I think is there's an interesting moment after, that occurs after when the prince transforms, and when he asks about Avenal, because when she looks at the prince, obviously, and because it's the same actor, she says, "You look like somebody I used to know." And the Beast and the prince says, "Did you love him?" And Belle says, "Yes, she does," which actually makes it more interesting, because going back to the beginning when we see Avenant with Belle and him wanting to marry her, and now knowing that she did love him and she still chose to not marry him, again, further proves the fact of how selfless she was overall. The fact that she was able to put her love aside to be with her, to stay and help stay with her father. So, but of course, I mean, obviously we figure she probably dodged a bullet and that she's better off with the beast slash prince at the end, because otherwise then the fairy tale doesn't work. Obviously that's the happily ever after. So, and I think by casting Marais as both characters, it adds an extra layer of subtext to the film. Because Marais is playing, as I said, he's playing a mirror image of two characters. And that's where I said, the mirror, so again, so that comes back to the element of mirroring in surrealism. So now, granted, I'm not sure if this was meant to be like a surreal element of the film, but it definitely obviously fits with the vibe of the film. And it makes a lot of sense. So yeah. So, but again, so I think Marais, I think he does a great job in both performances. He does a great job, distinguishing them in terms of their personalities. I mean, obviously, again, with him playing the Beast, it's easier because he's under all this makeup. So, and I think when I watched some of the behind the scenes stuff, it said that it took him like 5 hours to get into the whole Beast getup. And again, this is in 1945 when they made this. So I don't know what kind of special effects makeup materials they had back then. Obviously, it's probably not the same as what they have now, because it was 80 years ago. But and then I don't know if they had the same kind of ability to, for instance, aerate in there, because obviously when actors are in a lot of prosthetics, they tend to get really hot, and it might become dangerous because they need to cool off. So, but I think that Marais' performance in both roles is really good. So, and then Josette Day, she's so beautiful in the film, and she's such a joy to watch. Because it's funny because she's a character that they try to make her look homely. Like, obviously her sisters are meant to look more glamorous and dressed up to try to be the flashier looking women. And Belle is in these kind of more plain, just regular clothes, more modest clothes. But of course, she's the most beautiful woman in the film. That's what it has to be. And she is. And Josette Day was a very beautiful woman. So, and even though she's only one character in the film, Belle, Day gets to play Belle as if she were two, because the first version is her home version, the one who is essentially a servant to the rest of her family, and the one who's cleaning up after everybody and taking care of everybody, and then there's the one where she's with the Beast, where she basically gets transformed into a princess. So the beginning almost has like this very Cinderella-esque dynamic to it. So with Belle doing the housework and her sisters being, treating her poorly and being very insulting and degrading to her. I'd say one of the interesting differences between the original story and the film is how the sisters actually never get their comeuppance for their wickedness. So I said how earlier, like, one of the core tropes of a fairy tale is the fact that the villains usually get they get what's coming to them. And in Beauty and the Beast, I'd say in this like, so in the Disney version, Gaston's kind of the main villain. And I guess Avenant, to an extent, becomes like the end villain when he tries to go and kill the Beast. But I would actually say the main villains of the story are the sisters, are Felicity and Adelaide, because they're so horrible. I mean, they're such horrible people. I mean, they treat everybody with disdain and like, there's a point in the beginning when they want to go. I think it's they're going to a party, and they want to ride in these coaches, and there are the valets that are there that are meant to take them, and they're just yelling at them to come because the valets are just kind of sitting around sleeping and everything, but they're like, come on, and they're acting very rude and brusque with them. So I would definitely say that the sisters are by far the most the villains of the story. And but yeah, but again, they nothing really. When by the time the end happens, when Belle and the prince end up together, it just ends. We don't see what happens to the rest to her family. So, but in the original story, the sisters are actually turned into statues. So, but that for whatever reason, funnily enough, because there are so many other living statues in the movie, you'd think that could be put in there. But it was a choice that Cocteau made to not put that in there. And maybe you can interpret that, sorry, as the fact that maybe at that point it wasn't really about her family anymore. And the Beast is really, she is the only person that treats Belle in the way that she should be treated, because again, she is such a good person. So I mean, her father treats her decently as well, but the Beast is the one who really is like essentially lays out the red carpet. I mean, gives her everything. So he says that he and everything in his castle is for her. And there's this, there's a purity to Belle that makes her, incredibly endearing, even when she's being mistreated by her sisters, because she takes it. And that might make us mad because we don't want to see her being treated that way. But like in the beginning, when the sisters are sneering at Belle, and she just turns the other cheek, and she has this patience and this tolerance towards them. And I think the most glaring demonstration of Belle's compassion is there's a scene where the sisters, in an effort to try to get the key to the Beast's treasure room, and they go to Belle, and before they go there, they actually they rub onions under their eyes to get them tearing up and to simulate crying. And they go in there and they act all sad, and they beg and plead for her to not leave. They want her to stay. And Belle, in her infinite grace, actually reacts honestly to them. She and again, because she doesn't want to upset them. But when the sisters leave, she ends up she falls down on the bed in what I assume are tears, because it creates more emotional conflict for her. And it sucks because we know that the sisters are just are messing with her and not being serious with her, and are just manipulating her. And it just drives us crazy, because we it's like, man, the thing, and maybe credit to the way that they were either written and or performed, but you don't like her sisters. They're so unlikable. And maybe that's also a credit to how great Josette Day was in the film. But Belle, has a real, tenderness to her as well, because, she's always looking, to be giving and generous to others. Her unwavering support of her father, no matter what he's going through. As I said, going back to what I talked about in that relationship. Or the fact that, how she recognizes how tormented the Beast is, and offering him kindness. Belle starts to say things like, can we, at one point she doesn't want to just sit down and eat. She actually just wants to walk and talk with him. And then, and during that walk, he asks, and she was like, can't we just be friends? So you can already see that, even that, she's willing to she's already making progress. She doesn't quite see him as an animal anymore, but she hasn't quite gotten to that love part yet. She's at that friend zone where, can't we just be friends? But then eventually she gets to the point where, at one point she's down in the dining area, and she's waiting for the Beast, and he doesn't show up. And by the time he finally does show up, she's actually upset with him that he didn't get there sooner. And I think it's at that moment that we start to see that Belle is starting to have now real feelings for the Beast. So again, Day is able to create a great arc for Belle throughout the story. And again, so and her it create and because of her emotions, it creates real conflict because she loves her family and then she ultimately comes to love the beast as well, but she becomes torn ultimately of what she should do. But because of the nature of the story, it's Belle's true love for the beast that is what makes is how she makes her choice. And and because of her love for him, that again breaks the curse and turns him back into the prince. So and maybe that has something to do with the fact that her when she comes back, her father gets healthy again. So maybe at that point it's like, okay, my family's okay now, I need to go back and save the beast. So but the ending feels earned, I think, because of how likable Day's performance is. So we want things to work out for her. And I mean, I think the chemistry between Marais and Day is incredibly strong. So particularly when Marais is playing the beast. I'd say one of the most intimate moments in the film is when Belle allows the beast to drink water from her cupped hands. So she goes over to this fountain and she basically, she gets the water in there and then he starts licking it up after her hands. And actually you could argue that's probably maybe the most sexual, intimate moment in the film. So, and again, and because again, this was in 1945, 1946, they couldn't go very salacious with it, even though it was a French film. But yeah, that is definitely the most sexual moment in the film in a way. And it's the most passionate, I think because it's the closest they ever get. And it's sharing something between the two of them that is so intimate. So, and it's so meaningful because it's the first time that we see how Belle is treating Beast with dignity and kindness and seeing past his looks. And then, when, another scene that stands out is when Belle is pleading to the Beast to let her go back home, to visit her father. So just, again, a lot of great scenes and moments between the two of them. And again, they are the core and the backbone of the film. So, and the the performances are that strong foundation, but it's the fantastical setting that they inhabit that really elevates the film from a standard fairy tale. So Jean Cocteau wasn't your typical film director, but he was more of an all-around artist. So Cocteau contributed to multiple different kinds of art, including poetry, literature, theater, paintings, drawings. So he was a true art renaissance man, almost in a way that Leonardo da Vinci was, just with access to film. And I think because Cocteau had so many different artistic avenues, that's why he only made 6 feature films in his career. So because there was a 14-year gap between when Cocteau made his first film, The Blood of a Poet, and Beauty and the Beast. So, and Cocteau, he started making the film shortly after the Nazi occupation of France had ended. So the film actually had the added weight and pressure of reintroducing the world to French cinema after the war. And so that created this expectation because, France was an occupied country during the war. And I think that his peers, and I think that the French art and film industry, they wanted to be like, put us in a good light, remind people how good we are at this. And because of his artistic versatility, I think that gave him a much stronger foundation to transition and experiment with film as a medium. So, Cocteau wasn't bound by cinematic conventions or tropes, because deciding to bring his own surrealist style. And, Cocteau's decision to make Beauty and the Beast stemmed from the fact that the story again had more depth and complexity compared to most other fairy tales. And there's a clear difference between Belle's world and the Beast's world, with Belle's representing reality and the Beast's representing fantasy. So Belle's home is a standard villa, and it's kind of run down, so it's seen better days. Whereas the Beast's castle, and like the Beast's castle though, the villa was actually a real location that Cocteau found as well. So again, like the fact that Cocteau was able to find these amazing locations, credit to whoever his location scout was, unless he was able to find it himself. But he found and I mean, again, because Europe has so many of these older buildings, I mean, those are buildings that did actually date back. Again, the chateau was from the 17th century. So, I mean, that being able to make it there is perfect. So, but another way that we see that kind of dichotomy between Belle's world and the Beast's is, we almost always see Belle's home exclusively in the daytime, which, most likely is a way to differentiate it from the Beast Castle, which is darker and more ominous, and we see more often at night, or at least in the beginning we see it more at nighttime. And I would say that I think that Beauty and the Beast might be the very first fairy tale film that felt truly magical due to the numerous special effects, unique production design, and filming techniques that Cocteau used to tell the story. So one of the most standout features of the entire film is how Cocteau portrayed the Beast's castle as being alive. So I mentioned about the doors and earlier and how they talked, but in the very beginning, when Belle's father first enters the castle, we see these candelabras that are in the main kind of hallway, and they're being held by human hands. And so in the entryway, and so basically as the camera is panning, we see the arms kind of go out, and then we see the flames on the candles light up. And again, it's a very simple effect, but it's a very effective one as well. So that establishes right off the back that the Beast's castle is otherworldly in magical in a way. So, and because again, that was something that was not in the original story. So, and then also, when Belle's father sits down at the dining table, he sees that an actual hand is serving him, like it is actually like a hand picks up a decanter and actually starts pouring wine into a glass. So, almost like, Thing from the Addams Family. And then throughout the castle, as I said, practically every statue is alive. So most notably, there's the ones that are by the fire, where we can see like smoke coming out of their nose as they breathe. And then, there's a moment where Belle is pacing back and forth, and I think the statues' heads are following her as she's walking. And then in the treasure room, at the end, when Avenant gets shot in the back, it's by a statue that has a bow and arrow. So we see the statue start to turn as Avenant is lowering himself, and she pulls the bow back, and then boom, and shoots him. So, and he was actually shot in the back by a real arrow. So they put like some sort of cork, I think, board on his back. So similar to Yohei in Seven Samurai, who actually they actually shot him with a real arrow too. Jean Marais had something on his back underneath his shirt so that a real arrow could be shot with him. And that's something that you really appreciate. I mean, that's a real effect. I mean, it's dangerous. I don't know if a production company or an insurance company would insure a film that would do that these days. because that might be too risky to risk an actor shooting an actual deadly weapon at an actor. But again, this was back when you didn't have those kinds of concerns. So, but because of the fact that the castle was alive, Cocteau's film had, as you can imagine, a huge influence on the Disney film pretty much, a half century later, when all of the inanimate objects, the teapot, the clock, everything, they're all alive. So so the Disney version basically took the concept that Cocteau did and then just increased it and turned it further to make every inanimate object is pretty much alive. So, and then the other way that Cocteau creates a real sense of magic is how he filmed specific shots. So, as there at one point, when Belle first comes to the castle and she's looking around and exploring it, there's a part when she is going down a hallway and it looks like she's just gliding along the floor, and the curtains are billowing as she's moving. So again, I feel like that's another very Gothic image, but it's a wonderful effect. And I'm sure she was just on like a moving dolly or a moving, and just being pulled by somebody off camera towards the camera. So again, very simple, but again, very, very well done. And then another easy, or just again, and again, a lot of the effects that we see, even though again, they might be very simple to us because we've seen so much stuff now, I think they still look great. Simple, the simple tricks usually are the best ones. So there's a part when the Beast is carrying Belle into her room, and as they're entering the room, we see Belle's clothing and hair change to transition from her being the essentially the girl from her villa, the poor girl from the villa, to now the princess of the castle. So, and then probably one of the most, the biggest special effects moment, I would say, of the film is when Belle uses the magic glove to transport her to her home to visit her father, because, she puts on the glove and then all of a sudden she emerges out of the wall. And it's a really cool looking effect. Like, part of me still doesn't really quite know how that was done. But there are multiple shots in the film that were filmed in slow motion or in reverse, or both, actually. So when we see the candelabra's lighting, you can clearly see that the shots were done in reverse, where they were already lit and then they were extinguished and blown out. But it's played backwards. And again, I actually, even though we see that effect, I think it actually adds a more dreamlike quality to the film itself. So instead of, because again, that also is surrealist, because light, candles don't just magically light themselves, but to do it in reverse, where we see the smoke coming off and then the flames coming back as if after they had just been blown out, but in reverse. It just, again, the whole thing is just, Cocteau was brilliant in how he, again, created the imagery and the ethereal nature of the film. So, and then also, and there's another slow motion bit where in the beginning, when Belle first enters the Beast Castle and she's running through the entryway, it's in slow motion. So, and then when the Beast transforms into the prince and he rises from the ground, you can tell it was a reverse slow motion shot, because he just kind of pops up and he bows and he, tips his cap or his hand to Belle, basically thanking her for breaking the curse that was on him. And then finally, when the couple at the very end, when the prince and Belle fly away, there's the moment where they jump into the air, and you can see that it's a reverse slow-mo of the two actors having probably jumped down from out of frame into frame, and then it's reversed in slow motion to show them going back the other way. And then ultimately they are floating in, in space, as it were, in the sky to the prince's kingdom, and to live happily ever after. So, and then some of the camera tricks that Cocteau employed had been established decades earlier by the filmmaker Georges Méliès, which typically would involve shooting a scene with an object, stopping the camera, changing the object into something else, or it disappearing altogether, and then resuming filming. So a couple examples of this in the film when Belle returns home and she goes to her father's bedside where he's very sick, and she starts to cry, and then her tears start to turn into diamonds. So again, it's a very simple thing, but again, it works. And then as well, there's a point when Belle tries to give one of her sisters, Felicity, a string of pearls that she got from the Beast's castle, and it turns into a piece of old rope the moment that Felicity touches them. But then once Felicity drops them, they turn immediately back into pearls on the ground again. So I think so. Again, it's a combination, I think, of obviously of Cocteau using established effects and techniques up till that point, and then using new ones, or I assume new ones, or ones that hadn't been done very much before. I wasn't able to find if some of the effects that he used, if he was doing them for the first time, or if they had been used in other ways. But again, altogether, the fact that he used everything to make the film feel as magical as possible, and I think he succeeds, beautifully. So, and I think the way that Cocteau utilized the cinematic techniques and the stylistic choices so uniquely than what had come before it is exactly why I think the film continues to endure today and be loved for the 80 years that it has. So I'll say right off the bat that, I'm not very well versed in artistic styles and techniques. So, when I watch a film, I either connect with it or I don't, regardless of what's being done stylistically. So, I mean, I can appreciate certain things like when directors make certain choices, but to me, depending on it, ultimately it's how do I react to the film overall? Because sometimes a director's stylistic choice will connect to me, and sometimes it won't. And I think that's with everybody. So, but I want to stress this because, I'm not a film professor. I'm not a scholar. So I don't look at these films purely from an academic standpoint. So I don't watch a film like Beauty and the Beast, and I don't spend the time breaking down all the technical elements that Cocteau used to make it. I'm coming at this just from a pure spectator and film lover point of view. So when I talk about this, and when I'm talking about all this stuff, like, I just want to remind people that again, the way that I see this film is all on me. And I'm not trying to say that my interpretation is correct, or it's the only interpretation, or, my thoughts are what, because I think that art can be interpreted in so many different ways. And I think that art means something to everybody in very different ways. So, but my intention is to just make it so that you connect with these films, or at least encourage you to want to watch them. And I enjoy Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast because it's beautifully made, first and foremost, which is something that I greatly appreciate. So, and I think that Beauty and the Beast is probably one of the best live action fairy tales that I've ever seen. So, I mean, to be fair, there's not very many of them out there, I think, beyond what Disney has done, especially in the recent decade or so, since they started doing live action remakes of their own films. But if we're looking at non-Disney live action films, Like there's the film Ever After with Drew Barrymore, which was the reimagining of Cinderella. And then after that, like I can't off the top of my head, I can't think about others. If you can think of some other examples, you feel free to mention them. But yeah, I think that that Beauty and the Beast this version of Beauty and the Beast is one of the best live action fairy tales I've ever seen. And what I really appreciate is the fact that it uses practical special effects. So, and the fact that it was made in 1945 and 46, and has some truly impressive visuals that are still incredible. Because I'll always be a strong advocate for practical effects and classic camera techniques and tricks. Because, I think that some modern films, so many of them just use CGI so much. And some of that can be really great, and I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying that it's become so ubiquitous in films now that I think people have forgotten how great practical effects were, and how they were made in the past. Because I love watching a classic film like this, seeing something, and then I say to myself, how did they do that? I love that feeling, because again, it makes it more magical. Like the part when Belle comes out of the wall when she transports back to her house. If I really wanted to know how that scene, that shot was done, I could look it up and be like, oh, okay, that was good. But because right at that moment, you don't know, you might not know. Other people might know. I didn't know. And I love that. I love seeing that. And I love how movies can do that, because again, it makes them feel it's like seeing a magician. One of the core components of magic is not knowing how the trick or illusion is done. Because traditional practical effects weren't made on computers, you find yourself wondering what the trick was and how it was done. So the practical effects of the look of is probably the thing that I like the most about the film. So I don't know if that makes me more superficial in it. I like the themes. I do like the fact that it explores love, and the fact that it does have these different types of relationships, and the fact that it is a more adult, more mature fairy tale. So I do appreciate that. It's a film that you can, like, kids, I'm sure would like the film. I mean, even in the very beginning, Cocteau, because the opening credit sequence is basically him writing on a chalkboard in the very beginning, and then there's this kind of this opening crawl talking about the story, and it basically ends with saying, like, this is a story for kids. So Cocteau does acknowledge that the story is, it's a children's story, but he doesn't lean into it into the point where it's only for kids. So, and that's the beauty. It's what Pixar has done. It's what Studio Ghibli has done. You make something that kids can enjoy and adults can enjoy. And to me, that is a true superpower, I think, as a storyteller, as a filmmaker. So, and then I also really like the film's dark and Gothic style. The atmosphere of the film, particularly when it's at the Beast Castle, is very, very, wonderful and, terrifically effective. I love the locations of the film, especially the Beast's Castle, again, with the animals. I think that's probably my favorite of the structures in the film. What I thought was really interesting is the fact that the castle itself, it's still there, thankfully, but it's now part of a golf course. And it's pretty much, it looks almost exactly the same as it did 80 years ago. So in case you want to visit it, because one of the special features on the DVD shows kind of a retrospective that was made, I want to say in like the 90s, maybe the early 90s, because it has some interviews. It has Jean Marais. It has one of the actresses who played Felicity in the film. And then it also has, I think it's the cinematographer of the film. And, at one point it shows the location, and it starts with going to where the castle was and showing a bunch of golfers walking around. So, And so, and the thing is, Disney's had such a monopoly of fairy tale adaptations for so long. I think it's refreshing to see something different. So, and it's something that I think people will really like, because again, when you think of fairy tales, when you think of Beauty and the Beast, when you think of Cinderella, Disney is the first one that comes to mind. So I really recommend people watch this Beauty and the Beast, because it gives you a different perspective, a different adaptation, and one that actually did, again, greatly influence Disney's version. So, and I think that for people that like that kind of stuff and like that kind of magical storytelling and fantasy, you'll really enjoy it. Or I hope you really enjoy it. But I greatly respect that Cocteau saw more potential in the story so that it could be made for adults to enjoy as well. And as you're starting to see with Criterion, it's that they have a wide array of different kinds of films that they feature. So, while the previous film, The 400 Blows, was focused on pure realism, Beauty and the Beast goes in the complete opposite direction by being pure fantasy. And what I like about that is that it shows that that important and remarkable films can be from any genre. So, and I think certain genres like fantasy or sci-fi tend to be often dismissed as pure entertainment, as opposed to actually being high quality art. But Beauty and the Beast proves that that's not true. So, because people often ask me what's my favorite genre, and I don't give them a specific answer, because I think that fantastic films can be a part of any genre, and I like to keep my mind open to anything. So, I don't want to say that I'm limited to one type of film or another type of film. So okay, so now we come to the point where regarding how you can watch the film. So you can either buy the Blu-ray, the DVD, or the Blu-ray from Criterion's website. So I have the original DVD version. And you can find that on Criterion's website or on other retailers. And then for streaming, you can watch it. There's a couple options for streaming. You can watch it on the Criterion channel first and foremost. You can watch it on Apple TV. You can watch it on Fandango at home, or you can watch it on Prime Video on Amazon. So I would just like to say thank you again for joining me on the Criterion Chronicle. And I really hope you enjoyed it. And please stay tuned for what's coming up on the next episode. Up next on the Criterion Chronicle will be Criterion Spine number 7, Royd War Baker's adaptation of Walter Lord's definitive book about the sinking of the RMS Titanic, A Night to Remember. So if you want to continue on this journey with me through the Criterion Collection, then make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can follow along and not miss one of these amazing films. Take care, and I hope to see you next time.